And we are live on Oz Property Investors. We bring the big names and we have the big fun. How you going? Sorry, I should have told you we were going to hit the live, but it's okay. We are back in 2024, and it's just so good to be back. Like on a Wednesday night, what else am I doing? I didn't know what to do. I twiddled my thumbs, and I was like, what do I do with my time? How about you guys? What were you doing with your time at Wednesday, 7:30?
Well, I just want to apologize to everyone, really, because we've had a Christmas break and I realize I need some podcast time. And I went onto my favorite podcast apps and no one was uploading anything. So we did the exact same thing. And I'm like, why? Come on, guys, let's upload stuff. I need that content. As much as I love my family, I just don't need 24/7 with them. So, if we are that for you, I say sorry. We should have just pushed on through and gone through the entire Christmas period so we could get some uploads of this. So that's what I realized. I mean, we're not going to do that, by the way, but I do realize I did miss the current uploads for some of my favorite pods. But I don't know. What about you, Sophie? Did you have a nice breakaway?
I didn't break away at all. Like we're in moving season, and because I run the two businesses, the residential side and the short-term accommodation side, that was peak. So my holiday is really going to be, I'm going to say probably Feb or March. I'm going to take a really good break.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Treat yourself.
Treat myself. Yeah.
How about everybody in the audience? Like, hope everybody had a good Christmas and New Year, and what sort of like throw some comments about what 2024 is going to look like for a property, because that's what we are here to talk about. We are here to talk property. So, but how are you going anyway today, Joe? Like, how are you feeling? What's happening?
Oh, mate, I'm pumped. I'm ready to rock. I'm ready to go for this one. There has been a recent change in legislation and rules from the government, and there's, like with investing, there are things that kind of like a consistent, supply, demand, those things remain there. But there's also opportunities in inflection points. And one of those inflection points is regulation change, right? Like, I don't know if anyone's read Steve McKnight's book, 0 to 260 Properties in a Year. But there was a massive opportunity for him when they introduced the first home buyer grants. And all of a sudden, properties started to increase $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 based on that. And this, we've got a brand new regulation change with what the Victorian government has brought in, a state that's historically got terrible yields. Is this inflection point? Is this change going to be the new thing? And Sophie, the Victoria Queen, is going to help us out answer some of those questions. I understand it a little bit more. So I'm excited, mate. What about you? You well?
Good. Yeah, doing some yoga today. I realized how inflexible I am. So yeah, had to like kind of combat
you more.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly when got somebody beside you, like doing like doing the pretzels, and you're like, this is really making me like you can't even cross your legs. But no, going well, man. And 2024 is going to be a fun year property. Like I'm still mapping out what my sort of property goals, but pretty good idea. So I'm excited. But Sophie, what about yourself? How you going? Like, are you feeling like 2024 is going to be fun? Like, what's happening?
I'm getting massive FOMO personally. I am right in the middle of a renovation. So as soon as this one is done, that's when we'll be able to have a look and see where we go to, what we do next, and where we go to next.
It's okay. Everybody's running their own race, so we'll get to the exact destination you're supposed to be. So, but tonight's session, it's going to be our first, and it's going to be a fantastic first. So, as I say, of 2024, we've got Sophie to talk. We're going to do a quick around the grounds of Geelong as to what's happening, and sort of we're speaking about that before the show. I think there's plenty of fun things happening there, and we're going to talk about not a lot of people know about this. It's the old granny flat. You can actually rent it to tenants rather than actually before that. My understanding, correct me wrong, is you could only have sort of family members sort of stay in that granny flat. So to me, that's a huge opportunity. So I wanted to get on talk about what it looks like from an opportunity, like what you need to do, what are the numbers as well, because that's what we think mostly about calculator here as investors. So I think that's important. And also then as well, what things you need to think about. Is your property able to have a granny flat on it as well? Because it's all good and well saying, yeah, it's an opportunity, but can you can you practically have one even if it ticks those boxes? So it's going to be a huge session. Just answer any questions people about Victoria, particularly Geelong as well for Sophie. So big session, Joe. What I miss, man? Probably not much.
Well, I think you nailed it. I think this is going to be a good one because people don't know. So let's roll into it. Let's just kick it off. Is that what we do? What do we have quote of the week first? I forgot how this bloody process
Content
works.
of the week.
Run the ad?
That's right. We do content of the week. So,
Jesus.
Sophie, do you have your content ready to go? Because I certainly have mine. Think about it.
Sure
all.
do.
What is it? What's your content of the week?
Are we starting with Jeff or starting with me?
No, it's all you. Guess first. You got the goods.
Yep. Awesome. I've been consuming a lot of podcasts and audiobooks over the holidays. Well, I always do. But one person that I'm really into at the moment is, and I hope I'm saying it correct, is Mo Godat. Have you heard of him before?
You tell me.
Mo Godat is
Mo
the way.
Godat.
Mo Godat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard him.
So
you would have heard him, Joe, for sure.
So he was he used to work at Google X as one of their engineers. And now over the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, he's been working out the scientific formula for happiness.
Wow. that's where I've heard him. Yeah. Because I was like, I know that name, but I'm just trying to figure out where I pointed it. Yeah. So what's his formula?
You'll have to listen to the audiobook to find out. But it's but a lot of the stuff that he talks about is the formula is pretty much, and you'll go into it a bit more if you ever listen to it, but it's pretty much your expectation matches the event. So if your expectation doesn't match the event that you had in your head, that's the solve for unhappiness. And then
how do you make the expectation better? Because most of the time with most things in life, they don't really live up to the expectation. The real value of things is in the hype. Like buying a property is like, I'm buying a property, I'm saving up my money. That's the suck part where you have to save up your money. But when you're about to buy the thing, but then you contracts exchange and then you settle and you're like, where's the explosions? Where's all the joy? So
where's the confetti come down? Where's the fireworks when I buy that property?
Nothing.
It doesn't happen.
Hey,
well,
the
biggest take that I've gotten out of it is there's no such thing as happiness or sadness when you're being present. So every time you're being in the present moment, that is when you're really truly taking in everything. So there's no expectations. You're just there, you're living, you're enjoying every moment because you're not thinking about the past or the future or anything that's happening. And that's really the soul for happy, is just to be present. Well, that's been my take on it.
Well, that's good. Be present.
Jump onto Spotify and give us a 5-star rating, please, people. Or just send.
Please, where did that come from?
That's what I was just thinking about them. I was happy. I was so happy.
The present.
Someone has low expectations, so don't get disappointed easily. That's good.
Yeah, but then are you setting yourself up for not being able? Yeah, I know. Like I've thought about it. Like, are you having kind of almost a Socrates or that guy? Who was that guy who kind of had the stoicism? Who was a key component? Was that which was the main stoic?
So many.
Marcus Aurelius, probably.
Aurelius, yeah.
So yeah, do you want me to go next, Joe? I love that. That's great.
I've
changed mine as a result of your. I've been inspired by your purpose and about your Mo Godat about happiness. So I've changed mine. Okay. My resource of the week. Want me to do it, Joe?
Yeah, go wild.
Okay, so mine, and we're already like 10 minutes into this, so there's so much content. So mine is so I listened to a podcast with a guy called Peter Attia, and he's like a health optimization kind of guy. Really, he's just an interesting kind of dude. Like he's just flawed and talks about his flaws. But so he did a podcast with Bill Perkins, and Bill Perkins is that Die with Zero kind of. He wrote the book Die with Zero, and he talks about, well, rather than sort of delaying all that gratification in the end, actually throughout your life, actually enjoy some of that stuff as you're going along. Like instead of sort of saying saving up millions of dollars and then to 60, 65 and going on a trip, which like an active climbing a mountain or something, you probably can't do that at 65. Actually, just maybe dial it back a little bit, and even sort of passing down some of the some of the sort of stuff to the kids rather than putting it as, I'm not saying you should do this, you do your own estate planning as you please. But yeah, sort of focusing on passing on some of that wealth prior to, and giving to the children or whoever it is your benefactors are prior to them. Yeah, they can enjoy at their age. So yeah, that's my kind
Have the arguments while you're alive, not while you're dead. Just
I don't know about but no, that was a really interesting kind of fascinating, because we're all about like delayed gratification, like getting the next investment property. But what is it all for? What do we have enough as it is? Like, can we just kind of pull the pin on our career and go and spend that time at the beach with the kids or whoever it is, like who you want to spend it with? So what about you, Joe?
Well, that's also the beauty of being a property investor for people that have parents that might not have a lot of something. You can provide for them, and also not feel the pressure of, hey, I don't need. I've said to parents on both sides, I don't need any of your money. Whatever you've got, you just spend it. You have an amazing time, and don't leave anything for us because we're okay. So that's a great gift that you can give your parents or grandparents and let them spend the money by you being socially financially stable. But I like that. Die with zero. Get rid of it all while you're alive. I read a lot of business books. I read a lot of property books. But over the Christmas break, I went back to an oldie but a goldie. I don't know if anyone else has read this book. It's called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. So he kicked off a lot of that book. It was very foundational into me becoming an adult, and I really loved the book. It taught me a lot about travel. And the key premise of the book is whenever you want something, all of the universe will conspire to helping you achieve that. You just have to look out for it and be attuned to it, and put out positive energy, and you will get that back. And it sounds a little bit woo-woo the way I'm explaining it, but it's an amazing book. If anyone hasn't read it, I would highly recommend it, because he goes on a journey of kind of self-discovery and discovery of wealth and money, and he realizes some things along the way. So great lessons learned. Have you read that one, Soph?
I haven't read the whole thing, but
you got halfway and didn't read it? Oh my God.
I have. If you see the books behind me, I usually have about 4 books on the go because I like variety. But I really like that concept.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, so time to talk about Victoria, time to talk about Geelong, time to talk about granny flats. But before we do that, we do have to dive into the fun stuff.
The amazing thing with commercial property investing is that in most cases it's cash flow positive from day one, which means that you can drive those profits towards paying down the debt. There are instances with commercial property investing where you can actually have the property pay itself off over 10 years, which is absolutely crazy. With commercial property, you get massive net yields, so you can expect anywhere between 6 to 10%. And as we've seen in the current boom, these properties not only provide large cash flow, they do certainly grow wildly in value too. Now, with big rewards comes some risk, and this is why you should de-risk your investment as much as possible. And the way you do that is with expert due diligence. And this is why we highly recommend people hire professionals to help you along in your investing journey. Steve Polisi of Polisi Property is one such expert. Being a chartered mechanical and structural engineer in a past life, Steve draws on his analytical and mathematical skills to do that expert due diligence for you. With 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He's the guy you want in your corner, crunching the numbers and finding the best properties in the best locations, along with ensuring that you avoid the mistakes. Steve has actually even written a book on commercial property investing in Australia, and not only is it a bestseller, I believe it to be the most comprehensive in commercial property investing on the market today. He's been generous enough to give us a massive discount for our audience of 50%. So use the code OZPROP, click the link below, get a copy today, and start learning and getting on your commercial property investing journey.
And get on the journey. So what I'm loving the engagement interaction. Like people are saying, like maybe Mike Lowry's got an alter ego. Andy's saying that Sydney is king from the sounds of it. Jeez, everybody's on Sydney. Like don't worry about Victoria, but no, we are here tonight to talk Victoria and about granny flats. But first, if you don't know Sophie, I think one fantastic thing she did, she co-hosted the live event last year, and people have been asking, and every time that chatter comes up, I turn my notifications off throughout 2 days and just pretend I'm not seeing it, because live events, I just think organization. So we will have another one. Maybe we'll have another one in 2033, perhaps. We'll get one organized in the next 10 years. But no, Sophie, so you are, if you don't know who she is, you should definitely know who she is. She is the queen of Geelong property management. I hope you're okay with me saying that, but you're Director of Property Management at Real Estate Geelong. I hope that title is still should be a thing. And you spent over a decade. A decade, that sounds, would you start when you were sort of 12 or 13? That's a long,
19.
It feels like a while.
19 years old. Yeah.
But, I think the thing about you is, and having sort of chatted to you to help sort of my own sort of investment, that sort of stuff, it's really, you go the extra mile. So I know it feels like a testimonial, but I don't make it to feel like it. But I don't say that about, they don't typically guess we haven't done that. But to epitomize that, you are the finalist of the real estate 2023 National Property Manager of the Year. And you were saying that you were nominated for 4. I mean, you could have been nominated for up to 4 or something. I was like, maybe even more. So I was just like, that's insane. Like, so many, yeah. And you've also had a team of free career property managers. So you're sort of managing a team. So you're really sort of expanding out. So I think 2024 and beyond is going to be a great year and a great decade beyond for you. So good on you. So that's why we've got you in tonight to talk about in Victoria and about granny flats. But before we do that, we usually ask people about their first property experience, but we've done that with you last time. So I want to know, where are you looking to buy your next property? Like, what does property hold for you next?
My whole property strategy is going to change. So anyone who's listened to the last live or that has met me, my partner and I, the properties that we've invested in have been, we call it trash to treasure investing. Buy cheap, live in it, do it up, sell it, and move on. So we're now doing a farmhouse reno. So we use the equity that we made out of the last one and bought this one cheap, doing it up. And this will be the last live-in reno for a while. And come to think of it, I've been living in renos now for the better part of 10 years. It's been 9.5 years now since we've been living in renos. And it's time where sometimes, and it doesn't have to be this particular situation, but it's been that moment of going, right, is this serving us anymore? Is there a different way? What's going to fit our lifestyle more? So after this one is done, and then we're switching it over to farm stay to diversify, then we're going to be looking at things that are a little bit more set and forget.
What's farm stay?
Yeah, like short-term accommodation, farm stay, full experience of being able to come to the farm, have full farm experience, and
feed a baby goat. Wow.
The baby goats, the sheep, the chickens, they're all here.
So who's going to run that though? Like, are you going to get somebody to run that? Or are you going to run it yourself?
Yeah, I've got the team.
You got the gum boots? That's the most important thing, obviously.
Got the gum boots and all that.
That's going to be fun. Good. Yeah, that'll be interesting. Like, maybe we might need to, when you set the first one up. Like, I know maybe it's too niche, but would people watch like setting up a rural Airbnb? Because I kind of want to know about that, because I reckon there's some. Anyway, speaking of potential, so no, that sounds great. Like, what does a set and forget look like for you? Though you're going to buy more residential and something doesn't require a reno and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'd like to start doing a bit more that we don't have to do full reno, or a short reno that we can just flip and move on and not live in it anymore. And because of the business and things like that, 10 years ago, it's not the same as what it is now with running the business and the team. So now when I'm looking at investing my time, because a lot of time goes into doing this, the results are always great, but it's just working out time versus return. And doing more of that, investing in something that doesn't need a reno straight away, or you can get frozen equity out, such as doing a reno every now and then, like what Joe loves doing. That's going to be the
equity. That's a thing.
Frozen
equity.
Is it?
It is. People talk about that, Joe.
Yeah, you just
So when you know you've made it. when you have a term
Yeah.
people are talking about. So Fen, that sounds fun. That'd be great. So before
Well,
we get into
yeah,
the crux of
I'm hearing
the
things in the
Bitcoin
comments
property,
here. Vic is
what does that even mean?
the Bitcoin of property. We're getting a little
Is
bit
it
of
gonna
shade
is
now.
it gonna go to what does that mean?
Well, 4
Victoria.
years ago, that would have been a good comment.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, there's a good question that has come up. I mean, don't get me wrong. Vic is the Bitcoin of properties funny one, but what is frozen equity? How would you explain that one, Sophie?
Do you want
Just
me to cover
use it.
that one, or do you want to go into it?
You be my guest. It's now yours.
So,
You can have it. You can borrow it.
frozen equity, based on how Joe explains it with the ice cubes and all that. If anyone
Might be
watched
able
the
to figure
live
it out.
event, he went into all of this with frozen equity, but it's pretty much looking at properties that can be rented now or need minimal work, but there's opportunity to create more equity out of the property. So whether that be adding an extra room or doing a renovation and then continuing to melt that equity when you need it, pretty much. How did I explain that?
Nailed it. I would just add that it can be like an ugly duckling type of property, right? Where it's you could spend $20,000 on a renovation and get an extra $20 a week rent, but you don't need to. You can just get a tenant in, don't touch it, leave it, and then unfreeze that equity to make your $100,000 at a later date. And the same thing's true for subdivision. Like I was looking at a property today. We're going to turn it from a 3-bed to a 4-bed, a 3-bed 1-bath to a 4-bed 2-bath. Get access to that money now, and then it's got subdivision potential at a later date. So we get our equity now. We get, you put in $80,000 for, well, maybe a little bit more with the renovation to turn it. So maybe 110. You boost the value of the property. You get your money back out over 6 to 12 months, and then you've got that deposit there again in equity. And then do the development at a later date when you need it. As you start to build out your portfolio, your money will start to, and borrowing capacity will start to dry up, and then you'll have all this equity, and you can start doing those things.
You could even do a debt reduction kind of process, Joe, a strategy. There's so many. It opens up many options. So great. Speaking of options, actually, before we get to that quickly, okay. We'll have to start talking grannies, but granny flats, that is. But Geelong. So what is happening around the grounds in Geelong at the moment from I suppose, a property management, but also you get some insights into where investors are buying. So what's happening in Geelong at the moment? What are your thoughts, and where are people buying?
Yeah, so market is currently at a vacancy of 0.7%, and it's been obviously as stock levels go up and down, but it's been generally low over the last couple of years. And the demand for that has been either, it's not necessarily just cheaper properties or more affordable properties. Obviously, if something is clean and in the affordable property range, it's going really, really quickly, but also high-end properties. So whenever we have a property that's sitting 750, 800 in that range, it's going off like hotcakes as well. The mid-range properties to that 480 to 550, there tends to be more stock than the other one. So it tends to sit a little bit longer, but 0.7%, it's going quick. Anyway, so doing the investor support services and being on the ground, the pockets for buyers that I'm seeing, they're looking in the south, which is like Belmont and Grovedale areas. There've been a lot of buyer activity in there if they've got that higher range of that sort of 600 to 750 range to get into there. But then also if you're looking in that sort of 450, 500 entry level, people are looking at the north, which is Corio and Norlane. And then the east, which is Newcomb area. So it just gives both options depending on what price range you're looking at. But we've never been known for good yields. But when comparing to other states, unless you've held onto the property for say 10 years and paid it down, 5% really is sort of punching a good yield in Victoria. But hopefully the announcement of granny flats will just open up a new opportunity for investors to get better returns, or even just to see it as an opportunity if you've already got a property in Victoria.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's
a great summary. Like, well done for doing that in a couple of minutes. And go on, Joe.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important because right now you're right. Yields. I mean, I have a property that's $500,000 in Victoria, and am getting $380 a week times by 52 divided by 500,000. So it's a 3.9% yielding property. And that's an hour away from the city of Melbourne. And I have a very similar property at a very similar price in Brisneyland. And I'm getting $480, I think it is, $480 a week rent, which is a 5.9% yield. So it's kind of like it is tough as an investor to kind of I'll just pay an extra couple of grand to Victoria. Why not? Why not? So if there's a way to get a way to, because I have faith in the Victorian market. I think it's the ugly stepsister right now. It's been dragged through the mud. The legislation has not been easy. They have not made the tenancy laws are not friendly to investors. But if you're looking to diversify, right? You have properties in the pretty sister states like Queensland and Queensland and WA right now that's hot and the thing. Can you make the investment easier with a granny flat? Because it's looking, maybe, I don't know.
Well,
so can you talk us through?
I just want to say before we get into that, Joe, because WA was the ugly stepsister for like 10 or 12 years. It was ugly. It was like it was the Cinderella, the Wicked Witches kind of. I don't know. I'm just combining two fairy tales there. I don't know the fairy tales that well. But yeah, so I just I'm not saying you should buy in Victoria. You shouldn't. Like, you got to do your thing, but do your due diligence, all that sort of stuff. But it's just interesting. People kind of have a 3 to 5 year kind of, not even that. They have like a 1 to 2 year kind of mindset now. It's like, like WA, have to buy in WA. Like, I'm in Sydney and I'm buying in WA. That's the spot to be. Be counter-cyclical, be greedy. Yeah, I mean, it's the old Buffett kind of, but I mean, I don't know, Buffett, it's a stock market sort of thing. So, but it's to some extent it does apply.
15 years ago, we bought in Victoria for $780,000 and it was rented for $250.
Trying to see who that was. That's
wow,
Jen.
Good job. Where's it at now? It's a lot better now, so that's good. I'm glad you not have to.
I hope so.
I bloody hope so. Okay, so let's talk about the rules, the laws. What is this thing? So the Victorian government said some stuff on the internet. What did they say? How does it work? Can you give us the deep dive?
Pretty much. So and this is all really, really new. So it's sort of hot off the press stuff. So on the 1st of December 2023, it was the VBA. So the Victorian Building Authority, they came out with an announcement to say that they've amended the regulations, that now granny flats there's obviously a lot of changes in those regulations, but they can now be rented out to not just, you can rent it out pretty much. So before you could build a second dwelling. So granny flats are not new in Victoria. It's the fact that you weren't able to rent them out as second income or to someone who wasn't a dependent or someone who was a family member. So it was traditionally used as just an extra space that family could use, or as a dependent person's unit. And that's where the term DPUs comes from, which is the more common dwelling or second dwelling that was being built in Victoria.
So this is one of the things I heard in the group. People are like, why do they call them granny flats? I don't like the name granny flats. I want to be independent, but they're commonly known as secondary dwelling units in different states and things like that. So what's the sorry, I missed that DP thing.
DPUs, dependent person's unit. So that could be a granny flat, like as someone who's depending on the main household. So whether that be
like a nice way of saying granny
family,
flat.
I
haven't really stretched it too far. Like, it is an auxiliary unit that is detached from the main dwelling, right? Actually, in saying that, can you have a granny flat that is connected to the same dwelling, by a wall? Is that kind of considered a granny flat?
There's a few changes now that gives you the ability to do conversions as well. So it's not just a separate dwelling. It can be connected to the property and it can be a conversion as well, as long as it meets the requirements.
Okay.
But you couldn't rent that though if it was connected, I imagine, because how
If
would
it
you then?
if it meets the small second dwelling regulations, then it meets
Interesting.
it. Mm.
Yeah, because
So
that's potentially That's I'm sure other states, but from my understanding, you wouldn't be able to do it in other states. Victoria, there you go.
So what can we
that's
now
great.
do in Victoria? Like what's the gist of this thing?
The dot points? Yeah.
So
What do we?
yeah, definitely look at the amendments to get the full list, but just the key rules. The first announcement that came out was about the change of planning permit. So if the granny flats are less than 60 square meters, then you don't need a planning permit anymore. But it's as long as your block size is larger than 300 square meters, has no environmental overlays, flooding, meets the site and zoning title requirements. So that's when it's very property specific and specific to the title requirements. Small second dwellings now do need to include a kitchen, bathroom, toilet. So it needs to be a second home, not just a couple of extra rooms for. They haven't specified laundry, but that may come from council to council.
Yeah. Laundry is a big one usually.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There won't be any restrictions with how small, how it can be used, like being able to rent it out now. And like we said before, it was for family or private use, but now they can be rented out, but has to meet the requirements. It must, and they're saying that it can only be one extra small dwelling on the lot. But then there's a little section that says, but if your property can do it and based on council, so maybe we can have more depending on the property. So that's just
Yeah.
been opened a little bit as well.
New can of worms. So you've got 3 granny flats on the back.
No,
Is there a minimum like lot size that we can put one on?
minimum lot size is 300 squares. So you have to have 300 square meter block, but you do have to meet the requirements of how much garden and privacy and all that sort of thing as well. So there's a minimum garden area of 8 square meters of private open space for a second dwelling to have.
Yeah, it's crazy. I thought originally it was 450 square meters that we were talking about, but I'm looking at a brochure now, and it says 300 square meters.
Yeah.
That's insane. Like, so you could have, like, I mean, the house would have to be tiny. Like, could you just imagine, like, having 2 dwellings on a 300 square meter? I mean, I suppose that's what they do with townhouses and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's changing the mindset around what it will be like if you do have just a standard property and then you end up putting a second dwelling on it. It will change the mindset of maybe who's already renting there. Do they want to share? What is the privacy going to look like? So there's going to be a lot of those considerations that Vic haven't had to consider yet, but we can take a lot of help from, say, Queensland and WA and things like that have been able to do that for some time. So because it's such a new announcement and it's really going to be one of those proof in the pudding sort of things, especially with council requirements, that once the process starts, there's going to be a lot of grey areas that may need to be ironed out while we're going through this process. Because just because the VBA have came out with the announcement doesn't necessarily mean that the council are going to know exactly how to handle situations. So I was talking with, just relating to the local council today, City of Greater Geelong, and just getting a bit more sort of information about how they would handle certain things, because there's a lot of questions that are coming up, such as, are there going to be separate bins? Are there going to be, like, how is that all going to work? And utility connections. How's that all going to work? And what they said was the real grey area that is, just for looking at from the council alone, is when you go through a planning permit, it requires you to have separate utilities, to have separate connections to electricity and water. But if you don't have to go through a planning permit, then where does that leave it?
Yeah, how does that work?
Yeah.
So this is so new that, what did you say? No one has gone, there's 0 applications have gone through for it.
In Geelong, at least.
In Geelong at least. I'm sure that there's others, but it really is one of those, whoever's going to be the pioneers to start setting the standard of what it is. It's so new.
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Mate, this is a
I
good-
see that as exciting because it's an opportunity, and we're really going to know over the next year or two how it actually plays out.
From a property management perspective, like, how do you share a backyard if there is a granny flat on it, right? You're smack bang in the middle of the yard. How do you kind of separate these things and make it work?
And that's where it comes down to looking at your site and looking how everything is all configured. Because when you think about it from
Short
a
answer.
unit, yeah, fence, right? But if it doesn't allow to have a fence or something like that, then you'd have to look at how much privacy can I give them and how can I set that up, pretty much. So it's think about it as if you were going to be doing a subdivision, and you don't want to have the two balconies or the two units or the staring at each other, so you sort of configure based on that. It's pretty much the same process, except you don't have to go through a subdivision or pay $300,000 to now build a granny flat or a secondary unit to be able to use.
Yeah, it's just all those sort of practicalities on what it looks like, which I think is where your property manager would come in, because how would you sort of, I know you're probably going to have investors start doing these in your sort of area. So what's going to be your key kind of go-tos on all these sort of questions as they pop up? Like, who does the mowing? Like, how does, like, all that sort of stuff, like garden maintenance, like, how are you going to manage that sort of situation?
I'm going to treat it just like any other shared space, like units.
Yeah,
that's as simple as it's going to get. Yeah, there's going to be other things to take into consideration, but if it's planned properly, then it shouldn't be any different. You're still going to have a shared walkway space. You don't have to provide car parking for a second dwelling, which is a little bit different to if you were to subdivide and things like that. So that's something you don't have to consider, but it's really just looking at how is it currently set up and how are we going to best set it up. So then you can comfortably have two, especially long-term tenants, you want to be able to set it up that they're comfortable living in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going back to the property management sort of side of things. Do you sort of see that if people, do you think that if let's just say people down in the next year or so started building 100, 200 granny flats, do you think that would sort of then compress the vacancy rates, or do you think the market with that's I suppose a crystal ball question, but what do you sort of see about the demand for this type of accommodation?
Well, Joe, do you want to bring up the report? Perfect segue.
I didn't know.
Bring up that report, Joe.
You fed right into our hands, sucker.
I didn't even know it.
I knew where that was going.
I did see that.
Yeah, this is the report done by CoreLogic, Archistar, and some company called Blackfort. You guys can I'll just share it with you. But this is super interesting because it talks about the oversupply and undersupply of properties. So pretty much in Australia, rents are higher than ever. Things are going pretty crazy. We do not have enough houses to put people in. Rents are unaffordable. There's not much rental supply. The ACT government has capped rental increases with inflation plus 10%. So the government is doing something. The Victorian government has removed no ground evictions. That's nice. Good on you guys. Queensland legislation limits rent raises. But the problem is this is just addressing the affordability aspect. It doesn't affect the supply aspect. So no one's actually bringing anything else to market. But they ran some numbers here. So analysis by the National, you can't even see it. I need to zoom in. The National Housing Finance Investment Corporation forecast housing supply shortfall of 106,000 dwellings over the next 5 years. So there are some interesting times coming, right? Like the periods where we've had a massive undersupply were when we saw some really interesting property booms. When we had World War II, we had in 1970s there was some big housing shortages, the GFC. So there's been some opportunities where housing supply shortages kind of tied in with with property booms. But across Melbourne, there is negative 23,800 dwellings that isn't going to be built. And we're going to be undersupplied. And here you can see Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane via their undersupplied amount over the next 5 years. So the forecast supply shortfall. Isn't that like, I feel like supply and demand is one of those metrics that is kind of new. Like, I feel like it's come into vogue in the property space in the past, I don't know, 5 years or so. I don't know. I haven't heard it in the
they've been
media
doing supply and demand for like probably 50,000 years. So imagine, just back when we had the caveman kind of.
But marketing wise, like there hasn't been as much kind of spiel about it. I feel whatever. Anyway, there's a real problem here. And in Victoria, it looks like it's a bigger problem than it is in Sydney and Brisbane. And what does that mean?
They just ignore like Adelaide and Perth. Like, what do they just always ignore?
They just wanted the bigger numbers. They probably didn't want to do the research, to be fair. So this is where they did a little bit of research on where are the opportunities. So there are 655,000 residential properties that are suitable for a granny flat. So when you talk about like, oh, it's crystal ball stuff, not really. We need how many dwellings? 100,000 more dwellings, and we need them right now. So this is a really interesting opportunity to attack that. How much of the rental vacancy will that soak up? Well, if we can prefab a granny flat and get it on site, get it approved within a couple of months, that's really going to help some things.
And that was the reason why. That's the reason why they made the change as well, was because they could see that there was more need for housing and for affordable housing as well, which is in our area. If we're looking at what affordable housing means, it's usually a nice 2 to 3 bedroom under $450 a week or around that $450 a week. So that is a demographic that they are trying to fill, because the government, social housing, all that sort of thing, they simply don't have enough to cater to that demographic. And the demographic that has been most hit by increase of cost have been the lower socio-demographic, where up to 50% of their income is now going to housing because there isn't enough social housing.
50% of their income?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Jesus.
Let's bring. So we've talked about the potential. I suppose we haven't talked numbers yet. We will talk about numbers because that's important. What do you perceive? Because this is all granny flats are still released renting out to people who are still relatively new. But what do you? I mean, Joe and I can jump in here if you need, but I reckon you could have a more than a good crack at it. What do you reckon the long-term risks in granny flats and that strategy or that?
I like the idea of the fact that the planning permits were removed to try and make it quicker as such. Yeah. But I'm still glad that you have to get a building permit and have to get a surveyor involved, 100%, because there's a lot of those site requirements, and just you don't want to just put it on there and just put a cheap property on there and think that it's going to do something, because at the end of the day, it is an asset. And if you're putting something that's of value and you're putting money into it, you want to be able to get value back, especially if you're going to do resale as well. So I would definitely do a lot of due diligence and get the details, get the numbers, start looking at some information around what, if you are looking at spending sort of in that higher end of that, like 120 to 150, and what would that get you for the granny flat in return, by just comparing to what other properties in that market are doing, not necessarily granny flats, but units and things like that. So then you can get a bit of a gauge of what return you're going to get, and then taking the into consideration such as privacy, to make sure that it is going to be a solid investment in somewhere where people actually want to live, because that's going to be the biggest thing.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Jeff? What are some of the long-term risks that you kind of see? Because this housing shortage, right, it's not going to be around for the next decade, right? We are going to make more houses. It's not happening fast enough. The government has, like someone's said here, they're going to make $1.2 million houses. 1.2 million more houses. That's what they promised. There's no physical way for them to do it. The furthest they've got I don't know. We did numbers in another podcast about this.
I think it was about
They didn't
100,
really-
180,000 that they built, or 100, somewhere around the high 100,000s that they
100
is a record year.
times
And
by
so
5 is 900,000, right? So we're $300,000, 300,000 in a deficit to be built, which is where I think there's a great opportunity for this. But what do you think of the risk side of things, Jeff? Like, what are the long-term risks of granny
Well, I
flats
mean, for me,
everywhere?
the risks of you are to some extent limiting who's going to buy the asset, because if you build a granny flat at the which may impede capital growth to not may impede capital growth, because if you decide to sell the property, so resale value is probably the biggest risk in my I suppose opinion, because you're either selling to another investor or you're selling to a larger sort of family, like they had been sort of used for the granny flat. Like you sort of have a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom house with a 1 or 2 bedroom granny flat out the back, which I don't know about too many people. I don't really need a 2-bed granny flat at the back of my house as an owner occupier. But some people may. But then it's who are you appealing to when you're reselling? So, but if it aligns to your strategy on cash flow, then maybe that's not as much of a risk. So it's just kind of marrying up what you want to achieve with all your properties. But yeah, that's probably the bigger risk, and then even as well. Sure, I think that's the big one that springs to mind. And the only other thing is you
Someone
may
said
be.
here, what are your thoughts about slums being created because of all this affordable housing? It's creating a slum.
Well, I mean,
Define
I suppose
slum.
there's a risk. Sorry, go Sophie.
Define slum. How would you define a slum? For me, I think my thoughts around slums being created is that there are talking about the numbers, right? Bringing this little page up again. There are 650. There's over 500,000 dwellings that can have a granny flat put on it. There are very few investors out there. There's 30% of the market that are investors, which are sprinkled throughout all of the market. And then the ones that want to put a granny flat on their dwelling is going to be pocketed throughout everywhere. It's not going to be 100 people within this area here that are going to put up here. So I've got no concerns about slums being created. For me, I think the biggest risk is I will buy a house with a granny flat that makes an awesome man cave. It does. And if you can do something with it, like externally, and someone wants to buy that, you can. Insurance, you should get it.
Yeah.
Good.
As a general rule, you're considering this as a second home. So especially if you're going to be renting it out, still have to meet minimum standards and VIC compliance. Still have to do all that stuff, insurances. So it's all pretty much going to be exactly the same. So yes, you're going to be generating a second income, but it will have secondary expenses. Talk to your accountant about capital gains, what that all means for you, especially if you plan to do it on your own primary residence as a second income. So there's a lot of those considerations that you'll have to get your team around you to solve a lot of those questions for you.
Yeah, and if it is a PPOR as well, like definitely speak to your accountant, because that can have tax implications. Because you're changing part of the becomes an investment
Very
potentially.
good point.
So just consider CGT considerations as well. Not that I'm giving you advice on that. I'm not saying it may or may not, but it probably very likely will. What about this one? And we'll get to talking numbers, because I want to hear the numbers. What you sort of thoughts? What about movable granny flats? Have you? Because I think when we chatted the pre-chat, you spoke about this. So you're saying people are just knocking things up or knocking shacks up, but that's probably not a movable. But yeah, is this kind of doable?
I have seen a lot of shacks come up, to say the least. Tiny homes and movable granny flats are different to. So they're, depending on what area of the regulations you're looking at, will be dependent on what you end up putting. So there is a difference between a movable and a non-movable granny flat, and one of them's called tiny home. Yeah, it's just go into the regulations pretty much and just get that education. But there was a question before as well around being able to. Where was it? I'll have to look up now. I thought that was a really good one. to bring up. Someone asking whether could you have or sell a granny flat on the block without a house. It
Oh,
is
yeah.
a
I thought it was an issue.
second. Yeah, so you can't make that as the only dwelling on the house. You have to already have a dwelling on the property. But when you do have a granny flat or when you do have a secondary dwelling, you cannot sell it as a separate like it's the whole thing. You won't be able to subdivide it and sell it as a granny
Very
flat
good
because
point.
then that, yeah,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you won't be able to sell it separately.
Yeah.
It's not AB, it's not 17 Smith Street and 17A Smith Street sold separately. It is, you literally can't separate the two. They are stuck together and you will forever sell the house with a granny flat attached to it.
yeah.
Which is
But
a
I'll
very,
get,
very good point. But
yeah,
I mean, I think it's interesting because like I have a property in Victoria, like I said at the start of the show, but I can subdivide and split it off. I'm not going to be putting a granny flat on that purely because I cannot subdivide and sell off the granny flat separately, which limits a lot of my capital growth potential. So these new rules and regulations that have come out to print granny flats like there's no tomorrow, definitely not something that you should be, going out there without thinking. But if you've got a 400 square meter block that allows a granny flat, that is, I don't know, are we going to talk to the numbers side of things? Because I think that's pretty interesting. How do these things work from a numbers perspective? Like how do you think about these?
Well,
Yeah.
somebody's spruiking some land they're selling. I'll have to delete that comment. Sorry, but you can't promote your land you're selling. I mean, yeah. Anyway, that's fine.
4 times 4,000 square meter blocks, 15 minutes from Geelong. Good size.
West
Well, there you
Geelong.
go.
Maybe getting
is it
contact
Armstrong
with-
Creek? I'm not even
Probably.
going to ask. We can't spruik that. No, don't worry.
That's all right.
So you put it on.
Don't buy Armstrong Creek. Don't buy
but
these
just-
subdivisions.
Yeah, but on the subject of the movable versus not movable, I'll get a bit more information around that and share it to the group around what a tiny home is versus what a DPU is versus what a second dwelling is, because it's all going to be dependent on what you do. And if you do end up having the ability to get rid of the granny flat before you sell it or subdivide it, like you do see granny flats being up for sale as well. So like there's a lot of questions that I will need to put a bit more information to be able to share it with the group. So
I do love the idea of it as well, but just logistically, it's going to be a bloody nightmare. Like you need to plumb in services and things like that. So my thought was, what if I had, 3 or 4 properties in Victoria and I want to sell one? Great. I'll take the granny flat off, move it to my other one. But it's like, when are you going to have a house with a granny flat and then be able to perfectly move it because you need to sell this one and this one's not got a granny flat on it? Like, yeah, it's a little bit hard, but I guess it really is going to come down to rent as well. Like a 60 square meter granny flat, that's what they're allowing on it. A typical house, well, not a typical, but like 100 square meters is a very small house. Like 100 square meter house layout is very small. So you can probably only really get a 2-bed granny flat at 60 square meters, and that's kind of pushing it. It's going to have a small living room, 2 small bedrooms, a small bathroom. It's not really a massive property.
And mind you, 60 square meters is only if you don't want to have a planning permit. You still have to go through building permit surveyors, all that sort of thing. It's not the minimum of what you can put on. It's just the minimum of what you can put on without a planning permit. So just to clarify that. But the building range, and that's the thing, it's one of those things that if you start off in the lower range, they start off at around that 70 grand. You could probably find it cheaper depending on how cheap you go. But you're going to get entry level. It's going to be bare basic. It's the same as when you do a house and land package. You either go with the cheaper options or you go with the more expensive options. So generally speaking, they're sitting around that 70 to 150, and then it ranges from what the inclusions are. How big is the kitchen? Do you just have a basic toilet shower, or do you get more? Second bedroom, balcony, balcony and deck around, all that sort of thing. And really, before you're making a decision on that, it's the same basics as if you were purchasing a property, or if you were looking at doing an extension. It just comes back down to the numbers. What's happening in the area? What is that quality going to get me in return? What's that size going to get me in return? And just go back to basics on doing comparative market analysis.
It's the same.
What do you So I was going to say.
Someone who said, "What about a cinema? What about a cinema room?" So it's like, yeah, you can buy a prefabricated, IKEA box creation that's one bed, one bed, and the whole room is the living room. Like, you're going to spend that 70. What were the ranges? So you were looking at prices for these things. What's the typical price range that you were kind of seeing for the good ones and the more affordable ones?
70 to 100 is at that lower level, and then 110 to 150 for something that's a bit more.
And then if 100K, that's a 1-bedroom granny flat, I imagine, or is that a workout?
Yeah, some of them I saw were going into the 2-bedroom, but then they were very, very basic.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
so
actually, here's a great point. They still need to build the building regs. Some of them, like these prefabricated ones, like we're talking about, they don't always meet the Class 1 standards of building. So be careful of that as well. I mean, your granny flat builder would know all of this stuff. So just make sure you just don't go some.
Yeah, you'd have the builder, you'd have the surveyor, you'd still have to go through all of that process. If you were to just buy one, plonk it on the back and hope for the best, that's where you get a lot of that risk.
Worms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then from a rental perspective, can you Airbnb a granny flat? You can already do that now because there's no regulations around short-term accommodation currently. There's definitely restrictions and things like that, but no, there's no restrictions. So any property, because granny flats, as I said, or having a second dwelling on the property isn't necessarily new. And when I do have clients that come to me and say, hey, I've got this second dwelling or anything, what can I do with it? I go, before the regulations and all that, I'd say to them, look, we can't do this because at that time it was one tenancy to one title as a general rule in Victoria. But if you were to go down the Airbnb path, we have a little bit more flexibility on what we can do, or the short-term accommodation side of it. But now, even if a client comes to me and says, I've got this second dwelling or I'm thinking about doing this, it's now going to say, okay, does it actually meet the requirements to have it as a rentable property? And that's when it all comes back down to your builder, what you choose, the surveyor, and all that sort of thing, because it still does have to meet the requirements based on the small second dwelling amendments and the regulations.
I wonder what I'd be interested in when you first said 70K. I was like, 70 to 100. I was like, gee, what do you think one of those sort of finish or that level of granny flat would likely rent for? Are we sort of talking $150 a week, or are we sort of $100 a week? I wouldn't imagine it would get much more than that.
Depends if you go in and do a little reno on it as well, make it all nice. Look, the ones that I'm seeing at the moment just as a self-contained unit, and some of them have been done privately, not through because we haven't obviously been able to do it, but I've seen some ranging from $250 to $350 a week. Once it becomes normal and they're seen as a second property, I expect that will then become... it would then just compare to another unit if they're built that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be like a unit. Because, I mean, I saw a massive queue.
I saw it. It was on TikTok, I thought, wasn't it? Like, I didn't do TikTok.
And that's not just Melbourne. I had one in Geelong.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Can you do
it threw me off. Can you do a business out of granny flat, i.e. use it as a commercial property? Like they say,
I certainly hope nobody's running childcare from a granny flat.
Childcare with a Cairo inside it doesn't make any sense.
Without going into that info, it'll come down to your zoning.
Yeah.
Is it
very good point.
Look
at this massive queue. And it's like the thing I'm thinking about is like, all these people, 2-bedroom apartments in Melbourne. Why even bother, for one? Like, why are you there? Like, you get to here and you're like, I might turn around.
Do you remember when you used to line up for tickets when we were younger, concert tickets and things like that? It feels
but there's only one property. There's not 1,000 tickets. It's not a queue for coffee. It's a queue for one property. But you're right. That will change as people start to see units. They'll be like, oh, great, this granny flat thing, it's fully independent. It's not connected by walls.
Mhm.
Like it's going to be, is it going to be the same rent as a house? No, absolutely not. But is it going to be the same rent as a unit? Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'd be
Yeah.
happy to live in a granny flat. If I was younger and couldn't afford to
Mm.
pay for a house, yeah, absolutely. Let's just
Yeah.
do that.
And with the changes of affordability and people looking at all these different options, the landscape has changed a little bit as well, especially for younger demographic. And a lot of people are choosing the live in a share home or share with 3 people and all that. That's never really gone away, especially in Melbourne and Richmond and things like that. It's been normal to have that sort of share situation. It's when you have a family or when you're in a different side of life that maybe you want a bit more privacy and you just want a house and all that sort of thing. But there are, and especially we've got immigration coming in as well, and they're are more than happy to look at units and things like that. So it just opens up, like Joe and what we've said, it's pretty much just going to be another unit if it's planned properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, 100%.
I really want to talk to because we sort of skirt around the numbers as to what it could rent for, but I want to sort of
I
mean we should
let's chat
sorry.
about
we'll save that
So at the moment,
exactly.
250, 350 at the moment as
Before
what
we-
I've seen in the market. There was someone who mentioned that granny flat's going for 400 a week in Melbourne. And then there might be some that are in higher affluent areas that achieve higher rents. And it's all going to come down to the market and what suburb you're in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, we got to run our second ad. So we're going to run that and then we'll discuss some of the number side of things.
There's nothing worse than going into a situation unprepared, especially when that situation is purchasing one of the most expensive assets of your life against a trained property expert in the form of a real estate agent. It's a scary thought, but it is a skill that can be taught. Do you want to learn how to become fully prepared when buying a property so you can get out there, buy your dream home or investment property without the fear of actually messing it up? Scott Agate, the founder and expert property negotiator at Hello House, has been helping people buy their properties by stepping in and negotiating with the agents and saving his clients tens of thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars. Scott has now decided to share all that he's learned over the past 28 years in real estate so you can go out there and do the exact same thing on how to find a property, analyze that property, negotiate on that property, and transact on it to get the best results. He's created the Get Buyer Ready course, which is a step-by-step guide on how you too can become an expert property negotiator. It's the easy way of how you can avoid all of these agent games and get the best purchase price on that dream home or your investment property. The course is in short bites for busy people with no fluff at all. Just all the information you need to get buyer ready and secure that next property with confidence at the best price. Scott has been kind enough to give our community a massive discount with the link below. Sign up today before you even think about putting an offer on that next property, and it will be one of the best decisions you ever make. Yes, it
Joe's back.
will.
We're all back. So what because we were talking about this before and this is I heard and saw this come through, because at the moment I was looking up generally Geelong, you're sort of looking around that sort of 3.5, maybe if you're really lucky 4% yields. If you're really lucky, if you buy
how much?
ridiculously well, maybe. But I was sort of saying if you could put a granny flat on for sort of, let's say 150 and it rents for, I don't know, would you, if it's done really well and done properly, it would probably rent for anywhere between say 270, maybe 300, but let's just say 270. So I should have done that, but I was thinking, what's that? Let's just call it 300, just to quit. I'm being generous tonight. So 300 times 3 times 5. We'll allow 2 weeks vacancy. That's 15K extra per year. Plus, I haven't done numbers, but I worked in my head that would increase your yield to sort of around your sort of 5% sort of mark. So that's rough numbers. I should have actually done them, Joe. If you kind of got them there somewhere, but you probably don't. So I should have done these. I could have brought up a nice little spreadsheet. But so to me, I was like, oh, that's that's actually interesting. But what are your thoughts on that sort of the type of investor that would buy that sort of, because everybody says as soon as they say Victoria, it's like the yield is terrible, I can't buy there. What are your thoughts on the impact of granny flats for that type of investor who says, oh, it's too hard, yields don't make sense? Sophie.
Are you asking me? I thought you were asking Joe for that. Look, at the end of the day, it comes down to everyone's personal circumstance. Some people need higher cash flow. Some people do it for capital. That's, Geelong or Victoria.
Those are the two outcomes that we get out of property, right? It is cash flow or capital growth.
Yeah.
That is it.
Nothing really changes. It's either the numbers work or they don't work. That's really the reality of it. I see this as an opportunity for investors that may already be in Victoria, and they're looking at what they can do to diversify or to increase their income. And if they say, for example, we're thinking about buying another property, but they may not be able to, or they may have a little bit of money that they want to put in, but they can't necessarily buy a property, or whatever circumstance they're in, that might be something that they're willing to consider. But it really is a pioneer's market at the moment. It's really going to be whoever's going to really start the process and see how it goes, really.
People keep saying that granny flats are more expensive, and I thought that too. So why
well, that's one thing I just wanted to bring up as well, that like granny flats are more expensive than just a flat 70,000, right, or 150,000. That's just the granny flat, right?
Yeah.
You do have to think about other things that come along with that, like approvals for the granny flat. Like there's going to be a cost associated with getting that. We're going to get surveys in. We're also going to have a driveway. How are the people going to get to their granny flat? If it's just behind the dwelling and they walk through, that's fine, but you need parking. How are you going to set that up?
You don't need parking though, Joe. Remember, Sophie said you don't need parking.
I mean, you don't need parking, but it's
off
it's
street, mate. Off street. You park on the street. I mean, Geelong's safe, particularly Corio, right? I mean, very safe.
Park on the street. Park on the street in Corio. You're a maniac. No, but yeah, you need to. So what it'll be is like driveway fences and things like that, because what you don't want to do, like, I mean, do what you want. What I don't want to do is build a granny flat, cheap, rubbish, crap one, because exactly like that person said before, is like, okay, great. What happens when the market turns? Well, if you have a very high quality, amazing external dwelling that is separated, set up exactly like a subdivision and feels like a subdivision, that's an opportunity there, because people buy battle axe blocks and people live in them and they love it. And if you can get a battle axe block and make it feel like that, absolutely. People will live there. So I think my advice to myself buying a granny flat would be, don't cheap out and just kind of get it, but also run the numbers on it. From an investment perspective, like the way I ran some numbers, and I don't know how good this is going to go over
probably
audio.
better numbers than the ones that I did in my head. But the other consideration, and Sophie, I don't know if these will be probably the conversations you may be having with some investors who are going that up. The thing that I always thought about with granny flat is, do I, because if I can't finance that granny flat, as in if I have to sort of stump up 150, 200K, whatever it ends up being, am I better off? I mean, this is only a question I pose to myself, but open to discuss with the audience as well. Am I better off then buying an additional property for 400,000, and then I'm getting? But then I suppose it depends on the purpose of the purchase, because you buy that house for 400, maybe in Perth before it absolutely boomed and went crazy, you could have rented that for maybe 450 or 500. So you would have been getting a similar yield to what the granny flat would have, and you would have had a house and potentially put a granny flat on that house as well, in some parts of Perth. But then I sort of say, okay, well that works all good and well, but provided I can actually have the borrowing capacity. If I don't have the borrowing capacity, then I can't buy that 400K property or 500K property anyway. So it's weighing up, but I don't know. I'm still on the fence as to whether it's better to do one or the other. But if I could finance, if you could borrow to build flat, but
Well,
not.
can you borrow? Can you borrow to build a granny flat? In some instances, you
Well,
can.
You can potentially.
Construction loan.
You then sort of you'd need, if it was attached to that particular investment loan. Depends on your other sort of assets and that sort of thing. Let's just say you got a PPOR that's got very low debt. You could potentially do cash out of that investment to then go and build that. But then why wouldn't you just go and buy another house potentially? So it all comes down to LVR and that sort of stuff. It'd be a construction loan if it was the existing property, Joe. But then you've got LVR concerns as well. So yeah.
You need to be able to borrow those. You need to be able to borrow those funds to be able to do that,
and
right?
be able to service it as well, like just overall being able to cover extra maintenance and all that sort of thing as well.
Great point here is an equity cash out, right?
Well, that's what I was talking about. That's one of the options. The other one is if you're doing on existing property, you could do it as a construction loan, but then the construction loan, then if you've got a house that's worth 500, but you've got 400K on it, they're not going to lend you 200K because then your LVR is going to be over 100, well over 100. So yeah, speak to your broker, of course. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do anything, but
yeah.
And there's a comment saying, I think I should be investing in granny flat business as opposed to an M buyer. And I only talk about this and bring this up because when anything becomes popular, everything is going to increase. Because granny flats started going up because it was a cheaper option, family living together, all that sort of thing. It was the same as when the new regulations came in for compliance and safety audits and things like that. You had a heap of people coming through because it had to be done. You were seeing prices through the roof of having safety audits and all that sort of thing done. And now that it's become more normal, you're not seeing those price gouges anymore because now it's just, not saying they've been called out, but now it's more of a normal thing. So of course, when anything becomes popular, and granny flats did become a popular housing option during COVID for across Australia as well, and it just became more popular. But there are different, just like any other housing, there's going to be different ranges. But having, as a point was made before, now that these new amendments and regulations have come through, just make sure you do due diligence on what you're looking at and whether it actually is going to meet the requirements to have it as a rental property.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. The other risk, or one of the risks, if you're not building the granny flat straight away and you decide in 2 to 3 or 5 years, whatever it is that everybody and their uncle or auntie decides to build a granny flat, and the council that you buy your property in Victoria says, "Oh, hang on a minute, there's been too many. Now we're gonna tack on a 15K kind of granny flat charge because there's too many." That's what I did in Logan. They just tacked on that sort of, and now you've, instead of it being 200K or 150K, whatever it is, it's now 165 or 215. So there's always those kind of the unknown of. It's like when you buy a development site as well, they could change the zoning on you for better or for worse. Yeah. So you sort of just don't, you're not going to do it in the next 12 to 24 months, and they could change the regulations. So it's that kind of legislation risk.
Yeah.
What if there's someone in, but they're not going to do that. They can't put 100 people in 100 granny flats and then change the change the rules around kicking them out.
Council would just say, "Hey, look, there's too many." Like that's what I did in Logan, Joe. Everybody and their dog was building a granny flat in Logan, and they said, "Well, now there's a service charge for you to have," and they were charging people 15K because there's too many.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you meant that they'll change the rules around kicking people out. They're never going to do that, right? Like that's a current affair. You'll be chased after by camera with Tracy Grimshaw on you.
Nothing surprises me these days. Nothing surprises me anymore.
My biggest thing on this is just do the numbers, right? Like, if you get a house that is, let's say, like the property I was doing, right, $350 a week times by 52 divided by the purchase price of $500,000, 3.6% yield. If you add a granny flat to that, let's just say it's $200,000. So we're now at $700. $700,000 of value. We get $350 a week from the front house, and we get $250 a week from the back house, right? From the granny flat, $350. So that equals $600. divided by times by 52 divided by the $700,000 costs. No, my maths is not gonna. It's not gonna allow me to do that. So hang on. Sorry, I'm just gonna.
Not gonna
600 times by 700. Yeah. 1, 2, 3 is a 4.5% yield. So the biggest challenge Victoria is going to continue to face is the value of the rents. Right? You can build a granny flat. Like exactly like what I was talking about before. In Queensland, I own a property an hour away from the city. It's whatever it was, $500 or whatever the rent is. The same goes for granny flats. So if I put a granny flat on that property, I'd be getting a lot more rent. This is a way to create affordable ways to hold Victorian granny flats. Hold property in Victoria. For me, I feel Victoria has done a dip. COVID hit. It didn't boom crazy like other states did. It's been the ugly cousin. It's putting pressure on the government. That government has put pressure on investors. They've made it very not investor focused. But you can buy a property that was once valued at 700,000 and you can now buy it for 600,000. What? Where else can you do that? They have a massive undersupply at the moment. For the next 1 to 2 years, I think we're kind of slowly bottoming out, and we're going to hit the bottom, and we're going to stay at the bottom for a little while. But over the next year, 24 months, you're going to start hearing a whole lot more out of this, and there's going to be a lot more opportunities. The data's going to start to swing, because people are going to be buying a property for 600,000, and they're going to be selling it for 650,000. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Oh, what 700,000? But if you can't afford to hold this property in Victoria and you think there's a good opportunity there, but you want to hold it, maybe you're tapped out for borrowing capacity, but you have a boatload of equity that you can pull out, get a granny flat on the back of your property, use your equity to do that. That's going to make the cash flow position easier to hold, and you can then continue owning that property in Victoria and ride the capital growth wave that you're eventually going to get. Not financial advice, as we always say.
Just on that point, though, Joe. So it's more if you have a small amount of borrowing capacity, because if you have equity, like you could have $5 million of equity, but if you can't tap that equity if you don't have borrowing capacity. So it's if you have a small amount of borrowing capacity.
If you have just enough to be able to afford to buy the granny flat, like pull out like exactly like what you were talking about, Jeff. I don't have $500,000 borrowing ability or $600,000 borrowing ability. What am I going to do? You can withdraw $200,000 worth of equity, but I want to be investing. I want to be in the game. How am I going to continue my journey? I need to help with my cash flow. Well, you spend, like, if we look at it, so realistically, a granny flat is probably going to get, I don't know. I know we were saying 250, but I think 300 for a brand new, nice looking granny flat, 300 times by 52, divided by the purchase cost of $200,000, that's a 7.8% yield. That's pretty bloody good, right? That is your investment, because you already own the dwelling, or you're thinking about buying the dwelling. You want to own the dwelling, but you need to help with the cash flow. So 7.8%, people are spending money crazy like that. So if you can get a 7.8% yield, where else can you get that? By manufacturing the value. Will the property price drop? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to drastically drop. There's so many different.
I'm glad you added the word drastically, Joe, because drastically is a very subjective word.
Yeah. Anyway, I feel like I've jumped on a soapbox here and just kind of blurted out a lot of words.
Not even talking about house and land packages either, mate. Jeez, look at you go. No. It's good to see some passion, Joe. It's opportunity knocking potentially, but yeah, I don't. Yeah,
Melbourne's a dead goose.
I don't know. But
I mean, so many people are coming to Melbourne. People want to live in Melbourne, the most livable city, like the best city in the world. I don't like it, to be fair. I don't like Melbourne. I might have never lived there, but
it's an absolute city of contrast. It really is, like the most locked down, the most livable city. Like just those kind of two. Like how do they? And the 4 seasons in one day. Like 1 minute it'll be raining, and next minute it'll be 45 degrees, and then it'll rain, and it'll snow again 2 minutes later. And just like, what the heck is going on with this place? Like, it's just an insane place. So yeah, I think it's. Can
you talk to this? I don't know. Can you talk to this really quickly, Jeff? If just to answer how
Put
that
the-
kind of works. What's the
put the,
question? How can we borrow? Yeah, exactly. We'll put up the not financial advice, but how can we
yeah.
borrow against equity? My broker only talks about my serviceability.
Hmm.
I'm not going to. We don't do advice.
That's why I was sort of clarifying your point, Joe. Like you can have equity to the wazoo, but if you don't have serviceability, you can't. It's almost, I
How's
would
it work?
almost clarify, almost consider it as frozen. Maybe it's not frozen. That's not the word because you're talking about renovation, but I would consider that because I myself have got I've got a good amount of equity, but I don't have the serviceability to be able to tap into that. So that's why your broker uses that term serviceability. So it's kind of, brokers should just say, how much can you actually borrow, rather than saying, I don't have serviceability. That's great, you don't have serviceability. But how much can I actually get? Because equity, they'll say, oh, yeah, you got all equity, but that's why they talk in serviceability. Serviceability is probably the most important thing to get a loan.
So what it sounds like is you're asking for a $600,000 property. I want to buy a $600,000 or a $500,000, and the broker's like, no, you can only withdraw $200,000. You can only borrow $200,000 worth of value. So this is typically like there's a number of phases in building out a portfolio, right? What you want to do is get some foundational properties in your portfolio that you can eventually add to. Just earn more equity being unlocked. But you have typically phases in your property journey, and eventually what will happen is you'll have foundational portfolio that you could add value to in some way, subdivide, develop, renovate, put a granny flat on. That granny flat stuff is going to help boost your income because we're balancing our serviceability and our income, and we're trying to make these two like cash and equity and our serviceability and borrowing. So you might only be able to borrow $200,000. You then withdraw that from the bank because you've got the equity in your property, but that's all they're going to lend to you. They're not going to do a second loan to be able to buy a $500,000 property. They'll just allow you to withdraw your equity. And that is the money that is borrowed funds because you've taken it out from the bank. You're using it to buy another property, but it's still, debt, still, money that you have to give to the bank.
Can I simplify it even further?
Oh, I feel like I made it very difficult to explain.
If you have a house that's worth $600,000 and you have no debt on it, so it's purely just $600,000 is just sitting there. If you go to the bank or the mortgage broker, they will ask, okay, yes, you have the ability to access this money, but once the money's given to you, can you actually afford to pay it back? That's the simplest term that, in my not being a mortgage broker or a banker, but that's how it works out in my brain.
We've done it.
Yeah,
we've done it.
Makes sense.
They see. So what are your thoughts? So round this conversation out, granny flats in Victoria. Sophie, what are we doing? Is this a yay or a nay? A nay for you? What is it? Depends.
It's a nay.
The proof will be the proof will be in the, look, the proof will be in the pudding for me a little bit. It's such a it's exciting. The one thing that I'm excited about with this announcement is it feels like, and this is looking at it from an investor perspective, it's been a long time that I've felt like there's been an announcement that felt like it was in the interest of the investor. If we're looking at the last couple of years, it's all been land tax this and increase that and rent freezes this and lockdown that and compliance this. And so seeing this, even though it is as a way to help with the housing situation, I saw it as a plus because it was the first time that I looked at it and went, wow, it's one thing that could actually benefit the investor as well.
Yeah. Can you take advantage of it as an investor?
And then that's the question. So for me, going through this, and because I've been in property management in Victoria for the last 15 years, I've just seen the journey of what has happened. And I just thought that it was a really good step in the right direction. And I felt like a little bit of a breath of fresh air from that perspective. So I was quite happy to see that there was some sort of positivity going back towards that what investors could do, because I felt like we just got a big slap in the wrist for a really long time. Whether it's going to solve all the problems, we don't know. Whether it solves the problems with yields. I've got there's a question there saying if there is such a high demand for property in Victoria, then why are the yields and the rents so low? I do have a couple of theories which will probably take another hour and a half that I'm not going to go into today, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with the demand. I think, there's a lot of other things at play that's more to do with, like, without going into it, I think to myself, right, if every property manager and every landlord decided, right, my property is saying that it's worth 450, but if everyone across the board advertised their property at 500, would it actually affect the vacancy? And my theory is probably not. It probably wouldn't. But have we, as because we've had a lot of restrictions and a lot of tenancy advocacy and affordability and all that sort of thing, have those things come into play in the decision making of pushing the rents to go up and all that, or have so I'm not going to go into it a lot today, but I think that there's a lot of other things at play that may be impacting why the rents aren't going up in certain areas as much as what I think they could be. And that also comes down to property managers as well, is are they looking at it from an investor perspective, or are they just going, right, based on what every other property is advertised for at the moment, is that all that it's worth? But are they going the extra mile? Are they looking at supply and demand? Are they looking at demographic? Are they looking at all the things that investors would usually look at when they're determining what their property's worth? Do they have the time to? Do they care? Are they getting paid enough? Are investors getting charged enough management fees to even to carry the workload? There's so that's a whole other subject for another day. But I think that we could definitely, in Victoria, I think that we could do a lot better with our yields.
All right. I'll just have Joe and I. Well, Joe's already need to look at the break-even point for this one. Yeah, of course. With any sort of number or financial decision, hopefully that's what. Shall we do a live on break it? No, that'd be a little boring. I'm just thinking of ideas
that'd be very boring.
I don't know. Would it be that? I reckon we can make it entertaining.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. If you just a quick one on this one, how does it work if you have a granny flat? How do the management fees work? Like, does that look like? How do we think about that?
I imagine you wouldn't.
It would just be based on. It's just a percentage of the income. So whether it's coming from one property or two properties, it would just be the same.
Yeah, and then would you have two separate leases because you've got two separate people, right? It's like exactly 100%. Like if you had a subdivided plot at the back, or you've got one property next door. It's the same. Well, I don't know. I can't talk for your business, but that's kind of how I would think about it.
It's a good question as well. Have you factored I have not factored necessarily any of these, but it's something that people have to consider. Property management. Well, yes. I mean, but if you buy another property, you're going to have that anyway. So if any property or dwelling you own, you're going to have that property management unless you're managing yourself, which wouldn't suggest people do, but you guys do you. Reduce rent on main residence. What are your thoughts on that? Would it actually reduce? Are you thinking it might reduce the rent on the main residence?
I don't think it'll reduce the rent on the main residence. I think that it will maybe lessen who may rent it if they want privacy. So exactly. Like if it's in a family area or a suburb where it's mainly families and they want the yard, are you going to lessen the pool of people that would be renting your house by putting a granny flat in? Maybe not.
Yeah. That's a big point as well. Like you do have to think about where you're putting these things and where's the opportunity, because maybe you're better located near transport links and closer to shopping centers and things like that. You don't want to be in the middle of the sticks if someone doesn't have a car and they can't get to it and they want affordable housing. It might be better suited to be closer to, more accessibility for these people. But I mean, what are your final thoughts on this, Jeff? Like, how do you consider granny flats as an investment for Victoria?
Pretty similar to Sophie. I'm scared.
What did I say again?
Yeah, I can go on like it's like she's pretty much nailed it. Like it kind of comes down to it makes it a little more appealing as an investment. Like I already like I've said this once or twice on a live already. I think there is opportunities in, as long as you can buy well. Like if you go and just pay whatever the sticker price, on a deal in Victoria is, I think you're potentially shooting yourself in the foot. But if you can go and identify an area that is sort of has somebody who needs, you need to buy really well, and then sort of, if you're going to do the granny, just purely buy just because you can build a granny flat in Victoria now. I think if you're confident on the data and the numbers, and then you can then sort of, this is a cherry on top, so to speak. You might be able to increase your cash flow there a little bit, to then sort of to weight that.
The last thing that I realized we didn't speak about in this session is the basic assumption here is that you spend $200,000 on a granny flat. That end value is plus that $20,000 where the market value is. Does the market value actually increase at all? So just because you spend $200,000 on a granny flat, you own a $500,000 property, you spend $200,000 on a granny flat, it does not automatically make that property worth $700,000. So you do, one, we need some precedents. Like, what are houses selling with granny flats right now? Have a look. See, right now there are houses with granny flats on them in Victoria, so you can see what they actually sell for, as opposed to what the normal stuff is. But I wouldn't imagine it's going to. There was another comment here. So there was Queensland is well established. WA is well established. And there are people that are paying crazy money. I was looking at a deal in Queensland. The house is worth 500,000. The granny flat would have cost 200,000, and it went crazy. It went like 820,000 or something like that. So it well and truly covered its cost, and it was rented out as well. So there's multi-generational families. Like, people do want to rent these things, which is exactly why you don't cheap out, because you want that end sale value to be actually worth something, and you want to see an asset on the back of your lawn, not an eyesore. Asset over eyesore. Just full of it.
Yeah.
Quality statement there.
I wouldn't guarantee you can repeat that though. I mean, that's just something that, like you sort of, if it happens,
It's just
it's all
markets,
gravy,
right? You can. For me, like from an investment, like from an investment perspective overall, if I want to buy in Victoria, I think there's some opportunity here. But is that like, if you can buy a house and you can put a granny flat on it in any market, is this the absolutely best place to be doing it? I don't think, if you've got $700,000 to spend, I don't think I'd be putting it in Victoria with a granny flat on it at this point in time. The data's not there, the metrics aren't there. It doesn't really make sense from a yield perspective to be able to do that. But I work, I have people that come up to me all the time that are like, hey, I'm diversified, but I'm not diversified in Victoria. I've got WA, Victoria, WA, New South Wales. I need some Victoria because I need to de-risk myself, and I want to buy at the bottom of the market. Great. This is where the opportunity lies for you, because you can get in at the absolute bottom and then ride that wave. And also, well, I can't really afford to hold it. Well,
there's the assumption though that this is the bottom of the market. Nobody knows the bottom of the market. I mean, it could go lower.
No one knows.
Yeah.
So for me,
there's
it's
properties.
Like,
Look, there's properties that are being purchased at the bottom compared to what it had been before. I've seen properties being purchased for $420, and they've got the potential to rent for about $400. So it's not that.
Not a bad yield. That's like 4.6 or 4.8% yield. That's good.
$400,000 purchase and a 420.
420
other way around.
And then so other way around.
5% yield.
Not bad.
Nah, it's not quite. 4.8 roughly. It would need to rent for 420. Yeah, it'd be close, but not quite. It'd be 4.9.
4.95. So I'm going to round that up to 5.
One last, probably not. Maybe this is the last question. You agree with Joe? I don't know. I think they spelled Jeff wrong. They messed up the letters there.
Right, they misspelled it.
Just messed up the E and the F. But no, it wasn't about the yield. That was on something else. So I want to know. We sort of touched on this, but we didn't solidify. Like, what do you think works best for granny flats? Because great, you hit the 300.
That's a great question, actually. Fantastic question.
What actually works from a practical perspective, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's going to come down to livability and privacy. So the blocks, I would say that would I consider putting it on a 300 square meter block? Don't know. Especially if you're looking at renting it out to a separate couple, things like that. I think it would probably be too close for comfort if you're going to be renting it out separately. That's just my personal opinion, though, just thinking about what tenants are usually looking for. And even if they're doing that sort of share situation, you still want a little bit of privacy. So I probably wouldn't jump at doing it on a 300 square meter property. And it would all just come down to privacy. But I would focus less on the block, especially when it, like, yes, look at the block when it comes to privacy and stuff, but I would look at where the block is located and what suburb it's in and where the demand is. Because as we said before, it might be a 800 square meter block and it might be perfect for it. But if the demographic is more family who want the yard, then I wouldn't be jumping at putting a granny flat on it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So where would you probably avoid? Where would you reconsider if you're doing a granny flat in Geelong? Probably like your height and sort of those kind of areas, more
expensive areas,
central areas, close to amenities, close to universities. Yeah.
You would think not to put a granny flat there.
No, put one.
Did you say where to put them or where to not put them?
Where not?
Yeah, I was thinking. Yeah, I was thinking like that sounds like a pretty good place for an auxiliary dwelling. That's probably where
that's
people
exactly
want
where
to
I'd
be.
put them.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I'd do Belmont Height and
would be reconsidering. Great.
Yeah.
Has anybody got any last burning questions on granny flats or in investing in Victoria before we sort of wrap up our first? It's good to be back, getting the band back together, and no one better to have had on than Sophie. So any more last burning questions? Probably got time for one more. I was surprised that we were able to. Sorry, go Joe.
The only thing that I would add is literally it's just a numbers game, right? It's just like any other investment decision. You've got to make sure that the numbers stack up. And if you can stack up getting a granny flat, if it helps you, the most important thing is this doesn't hurt property investors. Like it can help so many more investors get that next, get that next thing going, get that next 7.8% yield. So there is definitely an opportunity here if you're in the Victorian market.
By the way. Gross.
Yeah, gross yield. Definitely not a net yield. But on a 7.8% yield, even if you're paying 6.5% interest, you're still positive.
This is an easy one.
Oh.
Easy one. The answer is probably very most certainly. I mean, Melbourne. What do you mean by Melbourne? Like which suburb in Melbourne? Like which suburbs in WA? Like, I mean, I suppose at the capital city level. What are your thoughts on? I mean, Sophie, are you comfortable answering this question? I'll actually throw. I'll answer it. I'm not normally comfortable answering these, but I will.
You can answer it if you want. My answer, I don't think it'll outperform it.
Right?
Yeah, no.
It's
very unlikely. I would say it's. I mean, something significant would have to happen in WA, and something significant would have to happen in Queensland. South Australia, maybe.
One thing is land tax is too high in Melbourne rather than. Is it? Like, is it that bad? I have a $500,000 blah blah blah, but I got charged $1,100.
It's nothing. It's
okay.
What's that?
What's $20 a week?
$20
right?
a week or something.
That's $20 a week. So who cares? If there is going to be good capital growth, I do not care if I'm paying an extra $20 a week. So, like, I think this is like I'm seeing all of these people are like, oh, it's got terrible investment things, it's got terrible tenancy laws. These are part-time things. These aren't gonna they're going to have to start creating more product and doing like. There's some opportunity in some places. If you can buy something for 600,000 that was once 700,000, but is it in the next is it in 2024? I don't think it's in 2024. But we're not buying for this year. We're buying for the next 30, 40, 50 years in our investing career. So think about it in a way that suits your portfolio. That's kind of how I would leave it. Yeah, there you go. Perfect analogy, right? Victoria has land tax, Queensland has high insurance.
I don't know about Brisbane. Brisbane doesn't have high insurance.
Well, if you're in a flood zone, you are. But that's actually a really, really good point. That I'm using that. Whoever put that up, I'm going to use that when people talk about Victoria.
That was Tom.
Hating on
Tom
it too much.
Zuates. He's the bloke. Tom
Quality.
wants us to do he lives in Melbourne.
No, he wants us to know it on a live session. Anyway, okay, well, let's wrap this thing up. Sophie, you've been amazing. How do people learn more about, one, granny flats, but also property management in the amazing Geelong region? How do we learn more about you? How do we get more of you in our lives?
I will put my details into the chat. Am I allowed to do that, Jeff?
I think so.
Cool, thank you.
Can do it for you. It's okay if Jeff does it. Jeff's very, very much removes everyone else's comments except for his own. So
I do remove some of my own comments, so I edit them because But Sophie, so what are your thoughts on any final thoughts on anything? Like before we wrap it up?
Yeah. It's because it's such a new thing. I know that there was someone who mentioned before saying, don't be political with answers, have a straight answer. With investing, there's no straight answer, and that's where it is sometimes hard to have an opinion, A, based on something that is very new to the state, and B, it's hard to have an answer that is going to blanket everyone's investment strategy because everyone's situation is different. So when it comes to granny flats, some people will go, yep, this fits my strategy. It's exactly what I've been waiting for. And it's going to be a good long-term investment for me. And that's great. And then some may go, you know what, I'm going to wait a year, see how it goes. And that's fine as well. So I think I'm excited to see what happens over the next 12 months, whether the theory of bringing out granny flats as a renting option will solve problems, will increase returns, will have high demand. But it's a really watch this space moment.
Yeah. Wrapped it up in a nice
any other way. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Sophie. This was unreal. I got more out of this than my
you thought?
Victorian property.
What were you going to say there, Joe? I'm actually
Victorian property's done well.
When you have to keep us posted in the team WhatsApp, chat. Keep us updated.
Do you want me to flick over the screen now and show you what I'm living in at the moment? That will be fun for everyone.
Let's go buy a property, guys. Let's go buy a property, maybe a granny flat. See you later. Have a good one.
Flattable. See you.